2026 marks 30 years since South Korea joined the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. Upon this milestone, Arirang TV is at the OECD headquarters in Paris, France, to highlight this partnership, how it's evolved over the decades, and the challenges the current 38 member economies face. For this, we talk with Mathias Cormann, OECD Secretary General.
Cormann is the OECD's sixth Secretary General. He took office in June 2021 after a long career in Australian economic policy making, including as Canberra's longest-serving finance minister. At the OECD, his work has focused on sustaining growth, managing the climate and energy transition, and guiding economies through digital change and artificial intelligence. He's been a powerful voice for upholding the world's rules-based trade and open markets. South Korea joined the OECD in 1996, a moment that marked its rapid industrialization from the ashes of the Korean War. In 2009, Seoul made a rare transition when it was removed from the organization's aid recipient list and joined the Committee of Donor Countries, marking its shift from development beneficiary to contributor in global economic policy.
Well, Secretary General, thank you so much for making time for us today.
Great to be here.
Well, let's go straight into the questions. So in your recent forecast, the OECD projects that global growth will continue in 2026 and 27, but growth does remain quite fragile. So what's currently supporting this precarious growth, and what do you see as the biggest sources of uncertainty?
Well, I mean, the first point is that the global economy has actually proven to be remarkably resilient in the context of everything that's been going on. Growth this year at about 3.2%, which, is still above 3%. And I guess there's a number of reasons for that. There's been higher levels of production and trade activity earlier in the year in anticipation of the announced tariff increases. But there's also been very significant AI-related investment, in particular in the United States, and economies around the world have provided significant macroeconomic policy support. Now, I mean, moving forward, I mean, there are certainly downside risks related to trade tensions, related to an elevated level of policy uncertainty, but also some risks related to sort of more structural issues, including the high level of indebtedness and the high level of debt financing costs related to high level asset valuations, and also in terms of structural issues, the economic and fiscal impacts of population aging that are really a drag on growth, as well as imposing very significant fiscal pressures over the medium to long term.
I see, and as resilient as the global economy is proving to be, how concerned are you about this escalation of trade disputes, tariffs, and some even saying that multilateral economic cooperation is dead?
Well, multilateral economic cooperation continues, and certainly here at the OECD we continue to do everything we can to ensure that multilateral cooperation is as strong as it can be moving forward. Now, I mean, having said that, I mean, trade disputes and policy uncertainty are negative for growth. It would be much better if we could have a sustainable resolution of trade tensions, if we could indeed have a return to a higher level of policy certainty. And certainly our advice to governments around the world, in particular our advice to OECD member governments, is to work harder bilaterally and multilaterally to reform international trading arrangements, make them fairer and function better, but in a way that preserves the economic benefits of open markets and rules-based trade. So there are a lot of downside risks to the economic growth outlook, but there's also upside opportunity. I mean, if countries manage to resolve trade tensions, if they manage to reform international trading arrangements in a way that keeps markets open, and that would also be a positive for the global economic outlook.
Well, many governments around the world are deeming artificial intelligence as central to their future growth and their national competitiveness. But there are some concerns, however, about how this competition is really unraveling. So what are your thoughts on this?
Well, AI is going to be fundamental to economic competitiveness moving forward. And I think that countries around the world understand that, and there's a range of things that will need to be managed better than what they are at the moment. I mean, in terms of ensuring access to the necessary infrastructure, in terms of making sure that the workforce has got the skills to participate and benefit from the opportunities generated by AI, but also in terms of supply chain resilience, access to critical minerals, making sure that all of the aspects of the AI-related supply chain can be resilient and secure. I mean, that is something that countries around the world will have to focus on very strongly. And indeed, OECD member countries are very focused on tackling precisely that. There's many policy issues that are raised by AI, but overwhelmingly, very exciting opportunity, both in terms of economic productivity improvements that it will offer, but also access to improved services, health, education, energy, I mean, you name it.
And what is the OECD doing to ensure that these policy efforts are coordinated for the benefit of humanity?
Well, I mean, we offer, our usual, in the best traditions of the OECD, our usual offering, which is to supply comparative data and analysis and information, and to share information and to support member governments' efforts to develop policy best practice, but also to facilitate the dialogue to ensure that, for example, AI-related supply chains can be as resilient as possible, to make sure that the development of AI is responsible, human-centric, and can be safe and secure, to make sure that countries are best equipped in terms of their populations, to ensure that the labour market workforce is well prepared in order to be able to take up the opportunities in front of us. So, I mean, there are many different policy aspects. I mean, diffusion of AI at present is relatively concentrated, both geographically but also within countries, predominantly towards the bigger end of town, the bigger businesses, and I mean, that creates, for example, competition policy issues, and there are cybersecurity related issues, there are privacy issues, intellectual property related issues. I mean, so many policy issues to be worked through and to be thought through, but fundamentally it's a very exciting development.
Right, and you mentioned demographics here, and for South Korea, East Asia and much of Europe, our shrinking populations are presenting a huge challenge for future growth and prosperity. And what is your advice for countries struggling with this demographic dilemma?
Well, look, I mean, Korea is, one of the fastest aging populations in the world, and so there are implications from that in terms of levels of workforce participation and productivity, and ultimately that will be a drag on growth. So ideally, policies in Korea could make it easier to have a family, and that goes to work-life balance related issues and work-family life balance. To boost fertility certainly would be, I mean, any policies that can boost fertility for Korea would be an economic positive. Now, but having said that, I mean, to a large degree, I mean, I think that there's a trajectory that is underway, and Korea and other countries around the world that are facing population aging related challenges will really need to boost workforce participation of all segments of the population. Now, Korea is actually already doing very well on that front. But whatever opportunities there are to do even more for people to work longer, as we live longer, healthier, we will need to work longer to have really all segments of the population optimize their participation in the labour market is going to be very important to balance out some of that productivity impact. And then, of course, AI. AI will be an important aspect of balancing out some of the participation and productivity related impacts of population aging.
South Korea in 2025 returned to the global stage after a very brief period of martial law and months of fallout. But from the OECD's perspective, how do you assess Korea's democratic resilience?
Well, your institutions have proven to be resilient. I mean, everything was managed on the way through, consistent with your constitution, and you have, a completely well-functioning system, democratic system. I mean, democracy has been very important to Korea's success. I mean, Korea has had an enormous success. And yes, I mean, there's clearly the system has been tested, your constitutional arrangements have been tested, but they have proven themselves to have worked very well through that testing.
So 2026 marks 30 years since South Korea joined the OECD. How do you assess Korea's role? How has it evolved over the years?
Well, Korea's transformation has been absolutely extraordinary. Like Korea is now an economic powerhouse. I mean, from a developing economy into the 12th largest economy in the world, a highly successful export-oriented manufacturing powerhouse, and Korea continues to innovate and continues to focus on its international competitiveness. And the fact that Korea has been open and has exposed itself to global competition the way it has been a key driver. And Korea's commitment to align with international best practice through the OECD has really been a key driver of its economic success, helping to secure significant increases in incomes and living standards for the people of Korea. But so, I mean, I think that Korea's story over the last 30 years should be inspiration for many other countries that want to achieve the same success. And I know that in Southeast Asia, countries like Indonesia and Thailand are looking very closely at Korea's example and experience. And that is in large part a reason why they're now part of the accession process with the OECD as well.
Of course, South Korea transitioned from being an aid recipient to an aid donor country within the OECD's DAC. And well, what kind of lessons or what do you think should be taken away from this experience?
Well, Korea has got a lot of advice to give, having had really clear frontline experience on both sides of the equation. Korea has a unique perspective to share with both donor and recipient countries. But fundamentally, I mean, Korea's embrace of market economic principles, of integrating into global value chains, its commitment to international best practice, all of the principles at the OECD, the rule of law, I mean, all of that has combined to make Korea the successful economy and the successful society it is today. And really, the biggest contribution that Korea can make to development is to show to other countries that are still at an earlier stage of development on what can be achieved with good policy.
Well, we're seeing that development assistance budgets are shrinking around the world, and met with this kind of budgetary pressure, then how should governments really adapt?
Well, we would prefer if those development aid budgets weren't shrinking quite as much as what they are, but it is true that there are significant fiscal pressures. Governments around the world are facing significant fiscal pressures, and so what we need to do is ensure that the public aid that does go forward, that is contributed, has the biggest and best possible impact. And part of that is, of course, leveraging additional private investment, using the public aid in order to leverage more financial investment into key development objectives. And that is also an area in which the OECD is providing advice, and it's an area in which Korea is providing advice to the international community.
And we are, of course, living in a time of high uncertainty within the global economy, and the biggest economies in the world engaged in trade disputes, trade wars. And well, in this context, how should South Korea and other so-called middle power economies really work together to ensure that multilateralism still works?
Well, right now, one of the most important things that all of us can do is to make sure that the conversations keep going. I mean, inevitably from time to time, and this is not new, there can be disagreements between individual countries, there can be disagreements between groups of countries. Always important in this context to keep talking and to really try and understand each other better. And from the OECD's point of view here, we try to inform, to help support some of these conversations by providing objective data and evidence to support some of those conversations. But ultimately, the only way to resolve disagreements and to resolve differences of opinion is by talking to each other. And so in many ways, dialogue and cooperation is more important than ever.
And of course, many were pleased to hear that you will be extending your tenure. So for the remainder of your term, what will be your priorities?
Well, my priority is, as it has always been, and that is to support member governments and partner countries around the world to achieve the best possible outcomes for their people. Better policies for better lives, and that is what I'll continue to focus on for the next 5 years.
And 2026, of course, marks 30 years of Korea-OECD relations, but also the 30th year of Arirang TV. So if you could briefly look at the camera and convey a message to our viewers, we would be very grateful.
Well, congratulations to Arirang TV on 30 years of quality journalism. For 3 decades, your channel has provided valuable information and perspectives on Korea's society, economy and culture. My very best wishes for continued success over the years ahead.
Thank you very much, Secretary General, and Happy New Year.
Thank you.